When I retired from the Army Corps of Engineers, I thought I'd finally found peace. A quiet acre and a half outside of Pine Bluff Ridge, tucked near the edge of an aging forest line, far enough from the freeway hum to hear the breeze through the pines. I bought the house with the well. Not because it was cheaper, but because I didn't trust city water. Never have. The well was old, deep, and steady. I had the whole system tested clean, strong flow, no contamination. It was my kind of reliable. I was 57 then, widowed. Just me and the dog Scout, a three-legged mutt with more heart than bark. He was my shadow, always trailing behind as I planted tomatoes or tinkered with the gutters. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet sometimes. A planned development just 10 years old with tan stucco houses and retirees who trimmed their bushes with scissors. I wasn't part of the welcome committee. That's not my style. I kept to myself. Waved when waved at. Paid my dues to the HOA like everyone else, even though they felt more like taxes than anything voluntary. The first time I noticed something was off was a Thursday, early May. I turned on the hose in the backyard around 7 in the morning to fill Scout's trough, and the water sputtered like a dry vein. Just air, then a slow trickle. I walked over to the spigot confused. Within a minute or two, it caught up and flowed normally. I chalked it up to maybe a valve glitch or maybe the pump needed a flush. But that little pulse of hesitation stuck with me. It happened again the following week, and the week after that, always early morning, always right before sunrise. The engineer in me started keeping notes. Time, pressure, estimate, duration. I pulled up the logs on my water usage. Nothing had changed indoors, same patterns, same cycles. But something somewhere was drawing water between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. That's when I walked the perimeter. I don't know what made me do it that night. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe I just missed the thrill of nighttime recon. Scout was limping a bit from a thorn in his paw, so I left him inside and walked the edge of my land with a flashlight close to the tree line. That's when I saw its soil that had been freshly disturbed, a faint track in the grass leading from behind my toolshed down toward the back slope of my lot, where the fence met the HOA-maintained greenbelt. I crouched down. The soil was damp, not just from dew. It looked like someone had dug a shallow trench, then covered it up poorly. I followed it another 20 feet, then saw something shine PVC piping, maybe 2 inches in diameter, just barely peeking through a spot where the filled dirt had collapsed. It had that faint chemical glue smell like it had been sealed not long ago. I stood there in the dark, staring at that little glimmer of white plastic heart pounding like I'd just spotted enemy movement through a scope. Whoever had put that there had trespassed onto my land, and they were tapping something. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I walked down to the HOA office. It was a small brown building near the entrance to the neighborhood next to the tennis courts nobody used. I asked to speak with someone from the board. A woman named Cheryl came out, mid-40s blazer, too stiff for a neighborhood this dusty, and a smile that felt like polished brass. I asked if any utility maintenance had been scheduled behind my property. She looked confused. No, sir. The HOA greenbelt is strictly maintained. We don't run lines through resident lots. I asked again, had they authorized any irrigation or piping work in the last month? Her tone sharpened. Sir, if there's damage to common property, we would have notified you. We have no reason to be on your land. She smiled again. Too wide this time. Maybe you saw an animal burrow. Sure, a raccoon that lays PVC pipe. That afternoon, I installed a trail camera behind the shed. Not one of those cheap ones. A military-grade infrared cam with no flash, no sound, and enough battery to last a month. Over the next 5 days, I saw nothing. Then night 6 at 2:17 a.m., the motion sensor was triggered. I reviewed the footage at dawn. There they were. 2 men in dark clothes, reflective vests, kneeling at the trench. They were adjusting something. One of them had a flashlight in his mouth and a wrench in his hand. I zoomed in on the badge sewn into the vest. HOA Facilities, Volunteer Oversight. I didn't even know we had volunteers. I saved the footage, dated it, labeled it. Then I got a call from Cheryl that same day. Mr. Harlan, she chirped, we've had reports of you placing unauthorized cameras near community borders. HOA guidelines require board approval for security systems that face public space. I told her plainly, that camera is on my land, just like my well. If someone's been digging near either, you'll hear about it soon enough. She paused. We'd hate to escalate this. Surely there's a misunderstanding. Exactly what I'm trying to clear up. I hung up. That evening, the pressure in the house dropped again more than usual. The kitchen faucet hissed like a broken valve. I checked the pump. It was whining, straining harder than it should, like something was siphoning while I was awake. Whatever they were doing, they weren't even bothering to hide it anymore. And I wasn't going to sit by and let them take another drop. The next night, I stayed up. I sat in my screened-in porch with a black thermos full of coffee, my old field binoculars, and the faint ticking sound of Scout's paws twitching in his sleep beside me. The camera I had hidden behind the shed had done its job, but now I needed eyes on the property line, not digital real-time. I'd learned during deployments that surveillance wasn't just about equipment, it was about presence, about letting the terrain tell you its story. The moon was thin, barely more than a sliver, but enough to see shapes move if you knew what you were looking for. At 2:14 a.m., I caught the flicker of light reflecting off something metallic down by the slope. I stayed low-weighted, then saw them same two figures from the footage. No hesitation this time. They went straight to the soft patch of earth near the greenbelt fence and knelt down. One of them lifted the panel I hadn't even noticed during the day. Camouflaged, painted the same color as the dirt. Beneath it was a valve box. The other reached inside and turned something slowly, carefully. I heard it. A faint hiss like pressure being released. They were stealing water, my water, through a system built to hide in plain sight. The rage I felt in that moment wasn't loud. It was quiet, cold, measured. It was the kind of fury you keep in a steel box until it's time to act. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. Not without proof and not without understanding the full scope of what they'd done. So I waited until they left 3:07 a.m., then went down with my flashlight and my phone. The panel was real. The trench had been better covered now, but I could still feel the softened ground give slightly beneath my boots. I peeled back a corner and saw the white pipe snaking westward away from my well and toward the far side of the greenbelt, toward the HOA office compound. That morning, I made 3 calls. First to a friend of mine from my Corps days, Mitch Ellison, now a hydrologist working for the county. I asked if he could take a look at some pressure irregularities in my well and if he knew of any neighborhood permits recently pulled for underground water connections. Second, I called a local land use attorney, a quiet guy named Bernard with a nervous voice, but a sharp mind. I told him I suspected illegal tapping into a private well by a governing body. His tone shifted immediately. "That's not just trespassing," he said. "That's theft. And if it crosses property lines, we're talking about serious civil violations, maybe even criminal, depending on motive and volume." And third, I called the HOA's maintenance hotline. I left a voicemail, polite measured, requesting a full log of any utility activity in the past 60 days near my property, citing Section 4.8 of the HOA Charter, which stated all adjacent property work required resident notification. They didn't call back. But that afternoon, Cheryl showed up. She stood at my front porch in a cream blouse and a clipboard that looked like it had never been written on. "Mr. Harlan," she said with that strained suburban sweetness, "we'd like to schedule a landscaping review of your backyard. Some members have raised concerns about drainage patterns that might be affecting common land." Drainage patterns. That was a new one. I kept my face blank. "You'll need a warrant." She blinked. "Excuse me? You're not code enforcement. You're not utility. You're a homeowners association. You don't have the right to inspect my land without permission, and you won't be getting it." She stiffened. "Are you hiding something, Mr. Harlan?" That's when I stepped forward. Not threateningly, just close enough for her to hear the steadiness in my voice. "I know what you're doing. I know you've got a pipe running from my well to your office compound. I know 2 of your volunteers are entering my land at night. And I know your water bills have mysteriously dropped at the same time mine's been bleeding pressure." Her face turned a shade paler. "That's a very serious accusation." "I've already contacted the county," I said, "and I've got footage. Don't insult me by pretending you don't know." She turned, not saying another word, and walked briskly down the front steps. That night, I caught Scout sniffing at the fence line and growling. I followed him flashlight in hand and found fresh boot prints. They were small, probably Cheryl's. She had come back. She was looking for something, or checking if I'd sealed off the pipe. I hadn't. Not yet. 2 days later, Mitch arrived with a portable flow meter and a geophone sensor. We spent the better part of 6 hours surveying the land. He tapped the ground, measured vibration anomalies, checked static pressure, and finally gave a low whistle. They definitely tapped it. Looks like they connected to a bypass valve 30 feet underground. You'd never know unless you were looking. He knelt hand on the dirt, but they made a mistake. What kind? They didn't account for pressure drop and gravity variance between the well's pump and their endpoint. If they're not regulating the draw rate carefully, he trailed off. What, I asked. He looked up. It's going to blow. Apparently, when you pull too much water too quickly through a bypass from a pressurized well and you route it into a system not built to handle that flow, especially uphill, you create backflow risk. Air pockets, pressure traps, the kind that don't just hiss and whine, the kind that explode. It was no longer just about theft. It was a ticking time bomb on their property. And I wasn't going to be the one holding the detonator. That evening, I wrote an email to the entire HOA board, copying my lawyer, the city's water regulatory office, and the local paper. I attached the night footage, photos of the piping, a copy of the flow meter data, a simple subject line, unauthorized use of private water resources, pending legal action. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I had 4 missed calls, and Cheryl wasn't one of them. She was too busy trying to keep the ground from opening beneath her feet. By noon, the day I sent the email, there were black SUVs idling outside the HOA office. Not police private contractors. Unmarked, clean with toolboxes and laptops perched on tailgates. I watched from a distance, binoculars tucked just beneath the edge of my kitchen blinds. Cheryl paced the sidewalk like a metronome on overdrive, talking fast into her phone, her heels stabbing the pavement with a staccato fury. They knew. Whether it was my footage, the flow data, or the threat of legal escalation, I had rattled the cage. But instead of calling to apologize or explain, they went into damage control mode. That's when the memos started. The first came in the mail, folded neatly into an HOA envelope, dated the same day as my email. It was addressed to all homeowners in the development. Important water conservation update. Due to recent environmental concerns, the HOA will be implementing mandatory lawn watering restrictions and may conduct inspections to ensure sustainable usage. All well-fed systems must be registered with the board. Registered. They wanted to track private wells now. I turned the page over. Small print, dense, and coiled like a trap. Failure to register private water sources may result in fines or sanctions pursuant to Section 12.3 of the HOA's Environmental Protection Initiative, 2018 Addendum. There was no such section in the original HOA charter. I'd read it cover to cover when I bought the place. They were scrambling writing rules mid-crisis, trying to turn their crime into policy. If they couldn't silence me, they'd bureaucratize me into submission. I scanned the QR code printed at the bottom and pulled up a new portal on the HOA's website. Well Water Registry. Required submission. It had a drop-down list of addresses already pre-filled. Mine was at the top. They were assuming I'd comply, that I'd fold just like the others had over the years. But they didn't know me. I sent a second email to Bernard, my lawyer, attaching a screenshot of the registry page. His reply was immediate. Do not register. This is a power grab. They're trying to retroactively justify an illegal tap. I'm filing for a cease and desist against any further HOA correspondence until we have a court date. Stand firm. He ended with a line I hadn't expected. They're panicking. That's good for us. That night, I noticed something new. The HOA clubhouse, which had once been a modest stucco building with dead bulbs and a rusted bike rack, was suddenly lit up like a casino. Rows of fresh sod had been rolled out in front. New lights, a decorative fountain. A fountain in the middle of a water restriction. The same HOA that was accusing me of violating conservation policies had just installed a 300-gallon decorative pond with cycling jets and LEDs. I could hear it from my driveway, splashing, burbling, gurgling, mocking. So I did what any sane person with a tripod, a drone, and a thirst for irony would do. I filmed it. From across the greenbelt, I sent my drone over at sunset, quiet, high altitude, nothing intrusive. Just enough to capture the full angle, the fountain running, Cheryl walking out to admire it, clipboard in hand, the lights glinting off her sunglasses. Then I panned across the fence to my well. Dry. I cut the footage together in iMovie that night and uploaded it privately to Vimeo with a simple title, When They Say Conservation But Mean Control. I shared the link with Bernard, the county hydrologist, and the environmental affairs reporter from the local paper. I didn't go public yet. I didn't have to. Because the very next morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. Dear Mr. Harlan, it has come to our attention that you have made unsubstantiated claims about the Homeowners Association's use of your private water source. We demand that you immediately cease the spread of defamatory material, remove unauthorized surveillance equipment, and submit your private well for voluntary inspection to confirm compliance with community standards. Failure to do so may result in legal action. They were threatening me with legal action for exposing their theft, for protecting what was mine. I called Bernard. He laughed dryly. They're trying to flip the chessboard. What do? I asked. You don't blink. In fact, let's invite some friends. That's when he called the State Department of Water Resources. Apparently, they'd been receiving complaints across the region from neighborhoods with sudden unexplained drops in local water tables. Most were blamed on drought or residential overuse. But now, with my data footage and flow records, they had a potential test case for illegal inter-property siphoning, a first-of-its-kind violation that could open massive civil exposure. Within 72 hours, a state investigator named Mendez knocked on my door. He wore jeans, a dusty blazer, and mirrored sunglasses. Not the clipboard type, the kind that listened more than he talked. I walked him down to the edge of my fence, showed him the trench, the valve box, the sensor readings Mitch had left behind. He whistled low and said, "You have any idea how rare it is to catch them this early? Them. Neighborhood governance boards who think property law's a suggestion. This isn't just water theft. If they rerouted ground pressure wrong, they could collapse half the water table under this neighborhood." He paused, then pointed toward the HOA office. "You ever see the pipes that feed their new fountain?" I shook my head. He grinned. "Let's find out." He came back the next day with 2 colleagues and a ground-penetrating radar truck. Quiet, fast, professional. I watched them work from my porch with a feeling I hadn't had since I left active duty satisfaction. They were tracing the route, following the pipe. And when they found it, oh, I heard it. A roar of water, sudden and violent like a jet taking off underground. Then a boom. Scout barked like mad. Birds scattered. The porch windows rattled. I ran outside just in time to see a tower of water erupt from the side of the HOA office lawn, blasting 10 feet into the air, muddy and furious. The geyser twisted in the wind like a serpent tearing through the decorative fountain, flooding the sidewalks. People screamed. One of the SUVs screeched in reverse. Cheryl came running out of the office, drenched heels slipping in the mud. She looked up and locked eyes with me. I didn't smile. I just said one word under my breath. Exposed. The geyser didn't stop for a full 2 minutes. 2 minutes of chaos, mud, and hydraulic rage. It wasn't just a leak. It was a rupture. A pressure blowout from a system that was never meant to exist. And in that moment, everything the HOA had been trying to hide spewed 20 feet into the air for the whole community to witness. Within 30 minutes, every smartphone in a 5-house radius was filming. Mendez's crew from the Department of Water Resources moved quickly. They sealed off the area with caution tape, dropped barricades, and brought in a pump team to control the flood. A flatbed trailer showed up before sundown carrying a mobile water analyzer and a technician from the county environmental office. I stood behind my split-rail fence, arms folded, and watched as Cheryl paced in her soaked clothes, phone pressed to her ear, failing to keep her voice down. "You can't prove it came from his well," she hissed to someone. "There's no way he knows the exact pressure differentials." She was wrong. I had all of it. When Mendez walked over to me, his boots squelching in the wet grass, he gave a small nod. That fountain. It wasn't hooked into city lines. We just traced the inflow. It ran through 3 illegal bypass valves and a PVC tap pulling directly from a feeder pipe under your fence line. It's textbook misappropriation. I raised an eyebrow. Criminal. He didn't answer at first, just looked toward the office building where Cheryl and the other board members were now arguing with one another loud enough for people across the cul-de-sac to hear. Let's just say he finally replied, "This isn't going away quietly." That night, the HOA sent out an emergency update via email. Water infrastructure malfunction. Dear residents, we regret to inform you that due to unforeseen structural issues in our irrigation system, a pipe rupture occurred near the main office lawn. Temporary shutdowns will be in effect while we investigate. Thank you for your patience. No mention of me. No mention of the state. Just a little passive-voiced masterpiece in blame deflection. So I made sure the truth got out. The next morning, I sent the unlisted Vimeo link to every resident on the HOA mailing list. I used a burner email address, anonymous. No commentary. Just a title, The Hidden Pipeline They Didn't Want You to See. The video opened with night footage of the 2 volunteers at my fence line cutting into the earth. It followed with clips of the flow meter satellite mapping overlays Mitch had helped me create, and finally the drone shot of the fountain operating the night before the explosion. I didn't need to say a word. The footage spoke for itself. By noon, the neighborhood was in open revolt. A small group of residents had gathered outside the HOA office gates, holding handmade cardboard signs, "Not in our name," and "Stolen water is still theft." Cars honked in solidarity as they drove past. A few teenagers on bikes filmed everything and uploaded it to TikTok with the hashtag. It went viral by that evening. 6,000 views in 2 hours. Someone even slowed down the video of Cheryl slipping in the mud and set it to dramatic opera music. I wasn't trying to humiliate her. I wasn't trying to become a local celebrity. I just wanted the truth to be undeniable, immutable, permanent. But the more the HOA tried to spin it, the more tangled they got. The following week, Bernard filed the formal civil suit Harlan vs. Pine Bluff Ridge HOA. The charges: show trespass, theft of private water, illegal infrastructure development, property damage, environmental endangerment, emotional distress. The filing went public the next day. Local news picked it up. The same footage I had shared anonymously was now playing on Channel 8's 5 o'clock news with the headline, "Neighborhood well water stolen by HOA Geyser blows case wide open." The anchor said the word Geyser like it was a biblical event. It kind of was. What shocked me the most, though, wasn't the outrage. It was how many neighbors came forward with their own stories, smaller infractions, that had never been addressed. I had a citrus tree ripped out without notice, one said. They charged me for a sidewalk crack that was on the Greenbelt side, said another. One couple even claimed that Cheryl had threatened them with foreclosure over an unmowed strip of grass, while secretly waiving fees for board members who had worse violations. A pattern was forming, one of entitlement, secrecy, and control, and now it was unraveling. Within 10 days of the Geyser, 3 board members resigned. One of the men caught in my night footage, later identified as Roger Klein, facilities oversight lead, admitted to installing the bypass valves under verbal instruction from Cheryl. He claimed he thought it was authorized resource sharing, but sharing requires consent, and they never asked. Meanwhile, the state launched its own parallel investigation. They began auditing HOA records, water usage reports, and permit logs. The more they uncovered, the more corrupt it looked. Cheryl, to her credit, didn't run. She stayed, showed up to meetings, wore sunglasses indoors. But her composure cracked in public. At one emergency HOA gathering held in the community clubhouse, a homeowner asked her point blank, "Did you approve the tapping of Mr. Harlan's well?" She paused too long, then said, "That's under legal review." The room erupted in boos. I didn't attend the meeting. I didn't need to. I watched the live stream from my laptop with Scout curled at my feet and a fresh mug of black coffee in my hand. The Geyser had done more than expose a pipe. It had exposed a culture, a quiet rot behind manicured lawns and laminated newsletters, a system that assumed silence equaled consent. And now the silence was over. 3 weeks after the Geyser tore open the truth, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me said pick up. The voice on the other end was hesitant, gravelly. "Is this Mr. Harlan, the guy with the well?" "Yes." Long pause. Then name's Joel Frazier. "I think we need to talk. I might have worked on your property." "I didn't know it was your property at the time." I stepped out onto the porch, heart pacing. "Go on." I didn't know they were stealing all right," Cheryl said. "It was a shared access point that the board had voted on it." I didn't interrupt him. I just listened. She called me late one night, said they needed a new irrigation line to reduce HOA water bills. Said the HOA had the right-of-way along the Greenbelt and that the well was part of the original plat from when the neighborhood was built. That was a lie. I'd personally verified the well was on exclusive, deeded private land when I bought the property. My lawyer made sure of it. Joel's tone cracked with guilt. I asked for a permit, he said, but she told me it would just slow things down. Said they'd handle the paperwork on their end. You ran the trench, he sighed. Yeah. Me and another guy, Victor. We came in after midnight 3 weekends in a row. Kept it quiet. Put the valve box in behind your shed, ran a 2-inch line under the fence connected to their internal loop. Buried it good, but... He trailed off. But you didn't account for pressure regulation, I finished. Exactly. They didn't tell us it was a pressurized deep well. Thought it was gravity-fed. When that fountain got added, that's when I started sweating. Joel asked to meet in person. I agreed, but only at my lawyer's office. 2 days later, he showed up, late 30s, sunburned, skin hands, calloused from work eyes, twitchy. He carried a manila folder with him. He slid it across Bernard's desk without a word. Inside were diagrams, invoices, texts from Cheryl, and photos from his own phone showing the original tap installation dated and geotagged. Bernard blinked. This is damning. She paid me in cash, Joel said. Even gave me a little extra to keep things simple. I asked, why come forward now? Joel looked straight at me for the first time. Because I've got a daughter in this neighborhood. I rent over on Juniper Lane. She plays in that clubhouse yard, and after that geyser. After seeing her feet in that water and wondering what pressure like that could do if it had been closer to the playground, I couldn't sit with it anymore. For the first time in weeks, I felt something more than anger. I felt sorrow. Joel wasn't blameless, but he was human. He signed an affidavit that day, agreed to testify, turned over every document. That folder became a bombshell in our civil case and a crucial lead for the state's ongoing probe. The fallout came fast. Cheryl's lawyer tried to claim rogue actors, that the tap was a misunderstanding by overzealous volunteers, that she was never directly involved. But Joel's folder told a different story. Her texts were direct, specific. One read, just tap the line behind the pine tree and route it west. It'll save us thousands on city bills. The homeowner won't notice. He's retired, keeps to himself. Another, no permits, no records, HOA business only. And another, this is our land anyway. He just doesn't know it. That line was like poison. Because it wasn't just arrogant, it was incorrect. We pulled the original subdivision maps. The parcel with the well had been excluded from the HOA plat entirely. The developer had sold the land before the HOA was even incorporated. Cheryl's claim wasn't just false. It was provably, documentably false. That map combined with Joel's confession changed everything. The city's Water Resources Board filed an injunction against the HOA. All infrastructure involving shared irrigation was frozen pending full review. The clubhouse fountain was shut down. The newly installed sod turned brown within days. Then came the big one. A leak. Not a water pipe this time, a person. Someone on the inside of the HOA. Her name was Maggie Lin. She joined the board a year earlier as the youngest member ever, 32 Vietnamese American, a former city planner who'd moved in to take care of her aging father. She reached out through Bernard. Said she had information, emails, meeting minutes, recordings. When I met her, she was nervous, but focused. She slid her phone across the table and hit play. In the recording, Cheryl's voice was clear. If we announce the water problem, everyone's going to demand credits. We've been billing them like normal. That'll be a disaster for reserves. Just siphon the damn thing. He won't fight back. They never do. The word they hung heavy in the room. I asked Maggie what she thought Cheryl meant. She shrugged. She meant men like you, quiet ones, independent, old school. Not the gossiping type. You know, the ones who build fences and mind their own business. She picked the wrong quiet man, I said. Maggie handed over everything. The minutes showed that Cheryl had never called a vote to approve any water reroute. The bypass project was never entered into the formal record. It was done entirely under the table. And when questioned internally, Cheryl had lied to her own board. Maggie's bravery was what finally tipped the case. Bernard filed a motion to expedite. The judge approved an emergency hearing. The HOA board was served. And for the first time since the geyser, Cheryl went silent. No emails, no statements, not even a rebuttal. But something told me the silence this time wasn't confidence. It was fear. Because when people like Cheryl operate in shadows long enough, they forget what sunlight feels like. And now, it was high noon. The courtroom was packed. Not with reporters, though. There were a few from the local paper in the back, but with my neighbors. People I'd barely spoken to in 5 years. People who used to glance away at the mailbox or offer tight-lipped nods at HOA barbecues. Now they filled the benches side by side, faces pointed toward the front, like they were waiting for a sermon or an execution. And in a way they were. The judge was a barrel-chested man named Halverson, semi-retired, known for disliking two things: liars and bad paperwork. His voice boomed like an old diesel engine when he entered. I sat next to Bernard, my fingers twitching against the edge of my pants leg. Scout wasn't allowed in the courthouse, but I could still feel his absence like a missing boot in a storm. Cheryl sat 3 rows ahead, her hair pulled tight, face pale and blank. Her attorney, a tall, brittle man with silver temples and a politician's grin, leaned close and whispered as the judge adjusted his glasses. We were there for a hearing on the injunction, nothing final but the first legal step in what was shaping up to be a landslide. Bernard stood with confidence and laid it out. This isn't about miscommunication. It's not about irrigation preferences or neighborhood landscaping. This is a case of calculated systematic theft of a homeowner's private resource. My client's well was tapped. His land was trespassed. The resulting failure caused physical damage to HOA property and threatened the safety of residents, including children who were present when the geyser erupted. We are not here because of an accident. We are here because someone thought they could rewrite the law underground. Judge Halverson looked over the exhibits: Joel's affidavit, Maggie's recordings, photos of the ruptured fountain and torn-up lawn, even a printed map showing the illegal tap line running under the fence. When Cheryl's attorney rose, he tried to reframe it. My client was misled by contractors. She believed, based on the HOA's outdated plat documents, that the well was shared. The oversight was regrettable, but not malicious. Halverson peered at him. Are you saying the emails instructing the contractor to keep it off the books and avoid permits were not written by your client? They were taken out of context. The judge leaned back. I've seen a lot of context in 20 years, he said. And usually when someone says, don't document this, it's not because they're trying to be neighborly. The courtroom laughed a low, bitter laugh. Even Bernard cracked a smile. The injunction was granted. Effective immediately, the HOA was barred from using or accessing any part of my well system, constructing or repairing irrigation lines near my property, retaliating in any form, fines, citations, or correspondence, holding closed-door meetings involving infrastructure decisions. It wasn't a final verdict, but it was a cannon blast through their foundation. And the ripples began immediately. That night, Maggie texted me Cheryl called an emergency board meeting. She's spiraling, screamed at Roger in front of everyone. The next day, Roger, one of the volunteers in the night footage, publicly resigned. He posted a statement on the neighborhood bulletin board that read, I was told this was an HOA-sanctioned project. I now realize I was used to violate someone's property. I apologize to Mr. Harlan and to the entire community. It was taped beside a photo of the geyser. One by one, the facade cracked. The HOA's new water restrictions issued in the wake of the geyser were suspended by the city pending investigation. Homeowners started organizing their own meetings outside of HOA control. Some demanded a forensic audit of all board expenses for the past 5 years. I stayed out of it mostly. I had no interest in running the neighborhood. But I couldn't help but feel the shift. People who once avoided eye contact now brought pie to my doorstep. One woman, Marcy, from 2 streets over, handed me a hand-drawn thank you card from her daughter who had been playing near the clubhouse the day the geyser hit. Could have been her, she said, voice trembling. It hit me then, how close this had come to becoming something tragic. And yet Cheryl still refused to step down. Even as her name spread across news headlines, HOA president accused in water theft scandal, she doubled down. She issued statements accusing me of exaggeration, of seeking fame, of weaponizing technicalities. It was pathetic, but also dangerous, because someone like Cheryl, cornered and exposed, doesn't back down. They dig deeper. One night I came home from a walk with Scout and found my mailbox smashed, the pole cracked in half. Just the mailbox, nothing else touched. A message subtle but clear. The police shrugged. Could have been kids. Bernard wasn't convinced. He installed a full perimeter surveillance system the next day, pro bono. We're not letting her rewrite the ending, he said. Meanwhile, the state had taken notice. An investigator from the Attorney General's office reached out quietly off the record. She'd been following the case, saw the filings, the footage, the backlash. Unauthorized diversion of water resources, can qualify as felony theft, she said, especially if done by someone in a position of fiduciary responsibility. She didn't name Cheryl directly. She didn't have to. That week, the HOA office received a subpoena. Public records, emails, financials, board meeting logs. You could feel the pressure building. Neighbors stopped mowing their lawns just to watch who came in and out of the clubhouse. A whisper campaign grew, not against me, but against Cheryl. She started walking less, then not at all. Her pristine car sat dusty in her driveway. The woman who once held court over every fence post and flower bed had vanished behind blackout curtains. And still I waited. I watered my tomatoes, played fetch with Scout, watched the late summer storms roll in over the ridge. Let the rain clean what it could, because justice isn't always a bolt from the sky. Sometimes it's a slow, steady build, and you don't hear it coming until the ground beneath you shifts. The storm came on a Tuesday, thick and slow, like molasses, poured across the sky. We'd been in drought conditions for almost 9 weeks, but that morning thunder rolled in from the north like something ancient had finally stirred. I was standing on the porch with Scout mug of coffee in one hand when the first raindrops hit the railing. A warm summer storm heavy with pressure. That's when the phone rang. It wasn't Bernard. It wasn't Maggie. It was Joel the plumber. He sounded panicked. "Mr. Harlan, you need to get over to the clubhouse. Now." What happened? "Something's wrong with the ground. It's sinking." Within minutes, I was out the door, Scout barking at the leash, as if he knew something had shifted. I drove slow through the rain-slicked streets, windshield wipers thudding in rhythm, with the dread crawling up my spine. As I pulled around the loop that circled the HOA clubhouse, I saw the crowd first. Neighbors huddled beneath umbrellas, some in pajamas and flip-flops, all eyes locked on the lawn where the geyser had erupted weeks earlier. But it wasn't a lawn anymore. It was a crater, 10 feet across, maybe 6 feet deep. Mud and earth torn back like a peeled scab. And at the bottom, pipes snapped, tangled flooding with brownish water bubbling from below. One section of PVC pipe had sheared in half, jagged edges, pointing skyward like broken ribs. The clubhouse's west wall had cracked from foundation to window pane, jagged like lightning. And in the center of it all, standing ankle-deep in mud, was Cheryl, soaked, screaming. She was yelling at a young HOA assistant, Marcus, I think his name was, about the structural integrity and the lack of oversight. Her voice cracked and twisted as she tried to wrestle control of the moment, but it was like shouting at an avalanche, because everyone knew. No one was buying it anymore. Joel spotted me through the crowd and jogged over water splashing under his boots. "It wasn't just the tap line," he said breathlessly. "I just found it this morning before the ground gave out." They installed a secondary sump system buried under the clubhouse. No permits, no drainage grid. They were trying to siphon overflow from your well into a cistern tank under the foundation. I stared at him. They built a water vault under the clubhouse. Yeah, unreinforced. Probably couldn't handle the pressure. When the storm hit, the ground softened, pressure increased, and boom! Another quiet disaster. Another hidden betrayal exposed by water. The fire department arrived shortly after. Not for a blaze, but for structural collapse. They cordoned off the area, declared the building unsafe, and began evacuating what few records hadn't been soaked beyond recovery. I watched through the rain as firefighters carried boxes labeled financials, infrastructure, and archives into plastic-wrapped crates. The local news van showed up 20 minutes later. By the time the reporter went live, the narrative had already written itself. Just weeks after a rogue tap into a private well caused a geyser explosion, the Pine Bluff Ridge HOA is now facing new scrutiny after a sinkhole formed beneath their office building, exposing more unauthorized infrastructure. What began as a neighborhood dispute has turned into a full-blown scandal. Cheryl tried to escape the cameras, shielding her face with a clipboard. It didn't matter. The damage was done. The crater was more than a hole in the earth. It was a symbol, a physical manifestation of the rot that had spread beneath the surface of our neighborhood for years. Later that afternoon, the city issued an immediate condemnation order for the HOA clubhouse. Unsafe. Structurally unsound. Unfit for use until reviewed and possibly demolished. The neighborhood was now leaderless. But what struck me the most wasn't the collapse of the building. It was what the collapse revealed. As the fire crew cleared the last of the wreckage, one of the captains, grizzled and soaked in sweat, called me over. "You Harlan?" he asked. "Yeah." He held out a manila folder, water-stained, but still intact. Found this in the back closet. Thought you might want to look. I opened it. Inside were copies of HOA meeting minutes from the year before I moved in. Handwritten notes from early board sessions. A permit denial letter from the city warning against unauthorized use of private well access due to land ownership conflicts. It was dated 4 years ago. They knew. Cheryl had known the well was private from the start. They tried to get access once before and were denied. She just never let it go. She waited. She lied. She manipulated. This wasn't an accident. This was obsession. The final nail came the next morning. I was drinking coffee on the porch when Bernard called. "She's resigning," he said, "officially. Her attorney sent notice this morning." I exhaled. It's over. Not quite. The state's not done. With this new structural collapse, they're pursuing environmental negligence and public safety endangerment. Could lead to charges. My silence must have been long enough to make him pause. "You okay, Harlan?" "Yeah," I said, "just tired." Because when a long fight ends, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like the dust finally settles and you can breathe again. That night, the neighborhood held its first HOA-free meeting at the local library. Not under bylaws, not with gavel banging or rigid rules, just neighbors. Real conversations, apologies, ideas, laughter even. I didn't speak much, just listened. But when someone asked about the well, everyone looked my way. I stood. "It's capped now," I said. "Monitored secure. No one's tapping it again." A pause. Then Maggie raised her hand and said, "But it gave us something." I nodded. Yeah, it showed us what was under the surface. And not just in the ground, in us. 3 days after the clubhouse cratered, I was sitting under the flickering lights of City Hall across from a state investigator named Natalia Reyes. She wore a soft gray blazer, her badge clipped neatly to the lapel, and a voice like stone skipping across water, calm but precise. "We've seen versions of this before," she said, thumbing through a file with my name on the tab. "But never this organized. Never this systematic. Most HOAs just get greedy with fees, overstep on enforcement. Yours built a shadow utility network, unpermitted, illegal, and actively concealed." I nodded. I didn't have much to say. Natalia opened a folder labeled HOA Internal Communications and pulled out several printed emails. One caught my eye immediately. Cheryl's name. The subject line read, "Confidential, Long-Term Water Independence Plan." She turned the page toward me. The contents were worse than I expected. A full 5-year plan to eliminate dependence on city water entirely for all shared HOA property lawns, clubhouse irrigation, by integrating low-cost off-grid sourcing via neighboring wells and greenbelt access points. There were target dates, budget estimates, contingency language for non-cooperative adjacent residents. I looked up slowly. She had a plan to siphon off others' private wells. Natalia nodded. "Yours was the pilot. You were the test case. They figured if they could pull it off without resistance, they'd try it with others, especially those without legal sophistication or the means to fight back." A heat rose in my chest, not anger anymore, but something colder, strategic, measured. How much trouble is she in? Natalia leaned back. The city is filing for civil penalties. The state will pursue environmental negligence and unauthorized construction. If we can prove misappropriation of HOA dues or falsified permits, we're looking at possible fraud charges. And with this collapse, the building inspector's report mentioned structural tampering to house that illegal tank. That brings in public safety statutes. It was happening. What had started as a whisper in the dirt was now echoing through government offices, courtrooms, newsrooms. Natalia tapped her pen. But there's one more thing. She opened a smaller envelope, then slid out a grainy photo, a screenshot from security footage taken outside the HOA clubhouse 2 days before the geyser erupted. It showed Cheryl and a man beside her. "Recognize him." I leaned in. "Yeah, that's Victor. The other guy who dug the trench with Joel." Natalia flipped the photo over. We traced payments. HOA discretionary funds used to pay Victor under the table. She wrote it off as landscaping consultation. No invoice. No contract. She looked me in the eye. She knew exactly what she was doing. The final pretrial hearing was held the following week. It wasn't open to the public, but the hallway outside the courtroom was buzzing. Bernard stood next to me, calm as ever, his satchel full of depositions and printed timelines. Joel arrived nervous, but resolute. Maggie showed up too, escorted by two members of the new interim board. The atmosphere wasn't tense. It was anticipatory. Inside, Cheryl sat stiffly beside her attorney. Her skin had lost its usual shine, her nails no longer French-tipped. This wasn't the HOA queen anymore. This was a woman in retreat. The judge reviewed the evidence, summary emails, testimonies, financial records. No one interrupted. No one dared. Then came Bernard's closing statement. "It's not just about a stolen resource," he said. "It's about the sanctity of private property, the trust we place in those who govern our communities, and the damage done when that trust is betrayed not by accident but by calculation." The judge nodded slowly. "I'll rule by the end of the month." Afterward, I stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun. Scout waited patiently in the truck, tail thumping. I climbed in beside him, ruffling his ears. "Almost there, buddy," I whispered. "Almost." 2 days later, Cheryl folded. Her lawyer contacted Bernard, offering a settlement. Full admission of wrongdoing. Public apology. Restitution for all damages, physical, legal, and emotional. Payment for well repairs, legal fees, and even landscaping restoration. And one final clause. Ms. Corwin will permanently resign from any and all HOA leadership positions, current or future, within the state of California. We accepted. The next weekend, her apology letter was posted on the HOA bulletin board and sent to every resident. To the residents of Pine Bluff Ridge. I acknowledge my role in the unauthorized use of Mr. Harlan's well and the subsequent damages caused. I take full responsibility for my actions and the harm they inflicted on the community. I sincerely apologize for the betrayal of trust, and I am resigning permanently from HOA leadership. I will cooperate with any and all ongoing investigations. Cheryl Corwin. Some said she'd been forced. Others claimed she wrote it with tears in her eyes. I didn't care. What mattered was what came next. The new interim board, led by Maggie, launched a full audit of HOA finances. They hired a third-party legal firm to rewrite the governing documents with strict accountability clauses. Residents were given more power, more transparency, more voice. And for the first time in years, I saw neighbors talking in the street without tension. Kids riding bikes without being scolded for straying onto grass. Laughter. Real laughter. The crater behind the old clubhouse was still there, roped off with yellow tape. But soon, they said it would be filled. Covered. Transformed. Maggie told me they wanted to plant a community garden in its place. "It started with your water," she said, "so it's only fair something green comes from it." I smiled. And in a quiet ceremony, with just a few of us present, we buried the last broken piece of PVC pipe beneath a small plaque that read, "Let truth rise where control once buried it." It was late September when the last of the yellow caution tape came down. The rain had returned in slow, steady rhythm that washed away the worst of the summer dust. The air smelled of wet soil and pine needles, again clean like a promise. I stood at the edge of what had once been the HOA clubhouse. All that remained was an empty lot smoothed over with fresh topsoil. Where the geyser had blown open the truth, where lies had collapsed into mud, now sat rows of newly planted raised garden beds. Cherry tomatoes, basil, peppers. A few small citrus saplings staked upright with twine. And in the center of it all, the plaque still stood. "Let truth rise where control once buried it." Maggie approached with a clipboard and a soft smile. "We've got 12 volunteers for the first planting rotation," she said. "You want your name on the list?" I looked at her, then down at the damp ground, then back. "No," I said. "Let someone else take the first harvest. I've had more than enough from this place already." She laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from surviving something big. Fair enough. The new HOA, rebuilt from the ground up, wasn't perfect, but it was honest. They held meetings in the library, now open to anyone. Budgets were posted online. Votes required real majority input. No more whispered decisions behind closed doors. Joel got his contracting license reinstated. He even helped repair some of the underground damage pro bono. Said it was his way of making amends. Maggie was elected president by unanimous vote. First one in the HOA's history without opposition. And Cheryl, she moved. Quietly. No announcement. No farewell. One morning, her house just sat empty, blinds, drawn, a moving truck idling in the driveway. A "for sale" sign went up 3 days later. I didn't wave. I didn't follow the truck. Some endings don't need punctuation. About a week later, I got a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. I thought I could control everything. But you showed me that pressure doesn't just build underground. It builds inside people too. You let it rise, and you let it speak. I'm sorry. I read it twice. Then I burned it in the fire pit out back. Some things are better left to smoke, but not everything. Because out of all this, something else started to grow. It wasn't just the garden, or the laughter, or the meetings held without fear. It was the sense that we'd taken something broken and made it stronger. Not by erasing the damage, but by honoring it. I fixed the wellhead myself, rebuilt the stone casing around it, sealed the access, and added a motion-triggered camera just in case. Not because I expected more trouble, but because trust isn't just given back. It has to be protected. And one morning, standing over the pump as it purred quietly underground, I realized something. This well, this old steel-throated miracle, had endured more than just a theft. It had become a symbol, a line no one had the right to cross, a resource not just of water, but of will. And it wasn't just mine anymore. The town paper ran a story the next month. One man's well stopped an HOA machine. They called it dramatic, poetic. Some even said it was an act of quiet rebellion. But they missed the most important part. It wasn't rebellion. It was restoration. Of boundaries, of dignity, of voice. Neighbors I'd barely known now dropped by with vegetables from the garden. Kids waved when they rode past on scooters. People spoke up more, asked questions, looked out for each other. And me, I went back to my quiet. The good kind. The kind I'd wanted when I moved here. The kind earned, not given. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch at Sunset Scout, curled up at my feet, watching the wind ripple through the trees, and listening to the low hum of the well pump turning beneath the earth. A steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. I'd think about how close we came to letting that rhythm be stolen, rewritten, replaced with something cold and mechanical and hidden. But we didn't, because pressure only builds for so long. And when it finally breaks, it doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it cleanses. Autumn came early that year. The air sharpened by mid-October, and the nights settled into a kind of quiet that felt earned. The kind that doesn't just fall from the sky, but arrives slowly after storms, after courtrooms, after secrets buried under manicured lawns, finally claw their way into the light. I took to walking the fence line each morning. Same path I once paced in suspicion, flashlight in hand, rage in my chest. But now, there was no more trench. No more plastic piping hiding beneath my boots. Just earth clean and undisturbed with dew on the tall grass and the occasional chipmunk darting between the pines. Scout still limped a bit on that old back leg, but he never missed a step behind me. Always there, always watching. We made it to the edge of the well, the very place where all this began, and I knelt to check the cover plate. Locked, sealed, untouched. Good. Beside it stood a small post I'd carved myself, a handmade marker about waist height, sanded smooth and stained with weather seal. On it, a brass plaque I'd ordered online, custom engraved. Property, privacy, peace. Established and defended 2025. It wasn't for show. I didn't care if anyone saw it. It was for me. For the version of myself that had almost stayed silent. For the hundreds of homeowners across the country who had called, emailed, or written after the news broke, sharing their own HOA horror stories. Stories of trees cut without permission, wells shut off, gardens banned, flags removed, dues doubled. Some had given up, others had moved. But a few said that hearing my story gave them courage. I never asked for that role, but I carried it anyway. Because what happened here wasn't just a freak accident. It was a blueprint of what happens when power goes unchecked in small places, where community rules are used not to build, but to control. And when someone finally says enough, the tremors reach farther than the ground they shake. I started getting invitations, podcasts, town halls, even a water rights symposium upstate. I declined most of them. I wasn't chasing a stage. I wasn't looking to become some symbol or spokesman. I was just a man who protected what was his. But one invitation caught my eye. A quiet email from the city's Department of Water Resources, asking if I'd consider serving on a citizen advisory committee, a new initiative to oversee local water infrastructure transparency and ensure homeowner protections were included in future planning. I accepted, not because I wanted influence, but because no one should have to fight alone with a flashlight in the middle of the night to defend their own water. One afternoon, Maggie stopped by. She brought a fresh jar of pickled cucumbers from the community garden and a thank you card signed by nearly 30 neighbors. Some of them didn't even know you, she said, but they watched. They saw what you did. She looked around the porch, the fence, the well. You ever think about moving after all this? I looked out toward the tree line. The wind carried that clean, dry scent of pine bark and old earth. I did, I admitted. Right in the thick of it. Thought maybe it wasn't worth the fight. But then I remembered this was never about escaping the noise. It was about drawing a line, a real one. Not in chalk or email or bylaws, but in the ground. She nodded. You drew it, she said, and they crossed it. Yeah, I said. And the ground pushed back. She stayed for tea, and we talked about the garden. About the upcoming election for the permanent HOA board. About new bylaws that were being proposed, rules that finally included language about homeowner sovereignty and the limitations of board authority over privately sourced utilities. I helped her wordsmith some of the clauses. The engineer in me still liked things precise. Before she left, she paused at the gate. You know there's still a part of this neighborhood that doesn't quite get it, she said. Doesn't get what? That the well was just the beginning. That what really changed was us. She smiled. And you. That night, the stars were sharp above the ridgeline. I stood barefoot in the grass, the cool dew soaking through my soul's scout lying beside the fire pit. The well hummed faintly beneath us, a deep, rhythmic pulse. I thought of Cheryl, of Joel, of the night I first saw the pipe glinting beneath the dirt, of the geyser that tore through the HOA's illusions like a fire hose through spiderwebs. And I thought of all the pressure that built before it ever burst. All the quiet trespasses, all the polite lies, all the neighborly deception. Water has a way of remembering, of reclaiming. But so do people. When they're pushed too far, when they're underestimated too long, when they're finally ready to let the pressure speak. I poured a glass of water from the outdoor tap, cold, clean, drawn straight from the well, and raised it toward the darkened sky. Not a toast, a vow. Never again. Not on my land. Not under my feet. Not while I'm still standing.